Hi and welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi is a mini computer which you can see here, and that's just the fourth model of the Raspberry Pi. And as you can see, it's basically a simple motherboard with some connections and plugs on it, so you can use it basically as a mini computer. What I want to show you first is how you can get a Raspberry Pi. So you just go to your browser, type in Raspberry Pi, you come to this website, raspberrypi.com. I'll leave it in the comments so you can go there as well. Here you see some explanations of the Raspberry Pi, and if you go on hardware, you can check out what Raspberry Pi set or just a simple Raspberry Pi you want to have, and you can use them to do your Raspberry Pi project. When you bought a Raspberry Pi, you can either just plug it into a monitor and connect the hardware to it. So just like that, you plug it into a monitor, you power it on, you plug in a keyboard and a mouse, and then you can basically just use the Raspberry Pi as a plain and simple computer. So if this doesn't happen, so you plug it in and put it into the monitor and it doesn't power up, then you first need to install the Raspberry OS. So every Raspberry Pi has a SD card in it. So with this SD card, on this SD card is the operating system, which you can use to just go, which is necessary to work with the Raspberry. If your Raspberry doesn't start up just like that, then you need to install a operating system on the SD card, which you can just simply do by using the SD card, plug it into a computer which is working with a SD card reader, then download this Raspberry Pi imager down here, download for your specific operating system which you have, and just follow the steps. And if you follow the steps, it guides you through the installation process of the operating system. Then after it's installed, you can plug the SD card back into your Raspberry, set up your whole setup, and then just power it on and it should work. Then if you start it up, there should be a welcome screen with a setup. You can go through the setup, just follow the setup process. And important is you have to, or if you have a keyboard, a spare monitor and a spare mouse, you can just leave those plugged into your Raspberry Pi, and you can use it like that. If you don't have a spare parts, you better get the Wi-Fi working on your Raspberry Pi, which is just you connect your Raspberry Pi to your local Wi-Fi, and then you can remote access your Raspberry Pi with another computer in your local network. And how you can do this on Windows, I'm gonna show you now. If you have set up your Wi-Fi connection of your Raspberry Pi to your local network, you can now go back to your Windows PC, open up the remote desktop connection, enter the IP of your Raspberry Pi and click on connect. Now you should get this login prompt where you can now enter the username, which is Pi usually, and in the setup process you hopefully have set a password for this user. So just enter the password, press enter, and you should be on your Raspberry Pi. You should see the same screen as you saw when you had your monitor plugged in to your Raspberry directly. So now you're probably wondering, okay, that's pretty cool and stuff, but first, how do I get my IP address of the Raspberry Pi? And second, it still doesn't work even if I have the IP address. You just stay on your Raspberry Pi, leave the monitor, keyboard and mouse plugged into your Raspberry Pi. You open up a terminal window, which is up here, and you just type in ifconfig like that, press enter, and you get information about your IP address. And this IP address you get out of the ifconfig command you can use in your remote desktop to connect to your Raspberry Pi, as long as it's connected to your local Wi-Fi. So the second thing you have to do before you can connect remotely to your Raspberry Pi is you have to install two packages. The first one is called Vnc Tightvnc Server, It's just a remote control server stuff for Linux. You just press enter. With this command, I'm gonna leave it to you in the info box so you can access it there. You just install this, and after you install that, I'm gonna just grab the other command, which is not very long, but still, it's this one, which just installs the rest of the remote desktop protocol program, which is called xrdp, and you just press enter and it installs this program as well. And now you're able to connect to your Raspberry Pi via remote desktop. So just do it like me. Open up your remote desktop on Windows, type in your IP address, log in with your Pi user, and you should be directly on your Raspberry Pi. Now you can just browse around and look what you can do with your Raspberry Pi. I'm gonna make some videos about some cool features or projects you can do with your Raspberry Pi later on. So first things first, I guess, the Raspberry Pi, it's good to know Linux basics. I'm gonna leave you a video of mine where I show you the Linux basics. Then you have the start menu here. Here you can log out. You have some programming IDEs, internet browser, some other stuff. You can have your preferences and settings up here. Then you have a terminal window, which is this one. It's pretty useful to go around on Linux to know your way around the terminal window. Then if you are used to Windows, you can just use the file browser, which looks like that. And you have a just usual browser, which is Chromium based. So yeah, now I would leave you to it and gonna end this video for today. And I hope you enjoyed. If so, leave a like and see you in the next video. Bye.